Welcome again to this presentation. Originally, this was put together with the presentation that we heard for second, because the two are related, but we had to make this switch. So now we have this switch of topics again. The main idea behind my presentation is that, as we've already heard in the second presentation, green growth has become a big issue now, especially in the developed world, but this is also a global issue. And so my idea was that if it's such a big thing, then let's try to check which are the countries that are doing the best at this. And this is a topic that has been where a lot of research has been conducted earlier, but the special thing about my presentation is that I'm going to use a model, a development model, to check the developments, and so this is fairly new in its approach. All right, so as I said, the key issue that is a global one is about green growth. Green growth is basically something that allows the economy to grow without the actual depletion of natural resources, and natural resources here are interpreted in a wide sense. So not just commodities, but a lot of other things like diversity and climate and stuff like that are included here. And a separate topic, but very strongly connected, is decoupling, which I would say it's a softer version of green growth, where the OECD says that this is something where economic growth continues while the indicators of environmental pressures are decoupled from it. So let's say they grow slower, or of course the better case would be if they decrease over time. So there will be this decoupling where growth still goes up, and then the economic pressures or environmental pressures stabilize, grow slower, or decrease. So the idea and the question is that if these are the targets, these are the goals, and let's see which countries do the best in them. And so for this, I use this FOI model, which is something that we developed with my colleagues around a decade ago, and we used this model to check what sort of development paths the OECD countries. This is a club of the most developed countries, and right now it has 38 members. So which development path these countries chose? Because, well, most of the OECD countries grow at a certain rate. Some of them grow quite fast, others slower, and there are one or two countries that has been basically stagnant for the past 1 or 2 decades. So most of them grow, but the emphasis in growth and development are different. And so that's what this model tries to identify. And it says that there are basically these 3 pillars of development. There is the future potential, which includes a lot of stuff that will determine the long-term competitiveness of the economy. Then there is the outside potential, which is about the current world market position of the economy, and then the inside potential, which is basically about the standards of living that the country is able to provide currently to the citizens. And so we have these 3 pillars, and we developed a methodology to measure them. We measure them by using lots of different indicators. They are listed here in this table. You might not be able to read them all, but they are also in my paper. So if you are curious, then you will be able to check it out in the proceedings. And so the way this analysis works is that you need to use a lot of variables, and they come from many different databases. In my case, they come from 9 different databases. And so you have these data sets. You need to have it for all OECD countries. Sometimes this is not possible, and it leads to some data losses in the later analysis. So it should be as complete as possible. Now, some of these indicators, they are used to calculate this F, O, and I indices, around 25 of them. These were listed in the table in the previous slide. But then there is another number of variables and data sets that are correlated to these indices that we calculate. And so we can say that these are the other like influencing factors that have some kind of effect on that pillar. And so what we can do is that we check these correlated variables, we set up factors of them, and then we can use these factors to explain the differences in the development path that the OECD countries took. Now, this is a complex method. It can be used for a lot of issues, but for what the thing that I used it for in this paper is to check whether there is a green growth factor among the different factors of this FOI index in the OECD countries. And what I found was that indeed there is, it's related, or it's correlated with the F index, so the future index of development. And you can see the 4 variables that were included. As I said, because of the specifics of the analytical method, it's really important to not have missing data, because if you do, then the countries that just have one missing data from one of the data sets, they were going to be disregarded during the factor analysis, and that distorts the results a great deal. So I could have had more data sets here, but unfortunately, because some of, or I would say most of the data sets that we have, they are incomplete. So there are missing values for some countries. These are the ones that I concentrated on. So this is about like energy efficiency, emissions. It's about how widely renewables are available, and it's also a population aspect. So indeed, there is a green factor in development within the OECD countries. Now let's see which are the countries that do the best in this one. And so I did many things. One of them was this cluster analysis. And so it seems complicated because I have 11 clusters here, but some of them are just outlier countries, like from 8 to 11. As you can see, these are just individual countries. And as you will later on see, the really important difference here, as far as the most developed countries are concerned, is cluster 1 and 2. And so these are robustly different countries, and they are basically top performance in almost everything. So they are very open economies, very globalized, very competitive in the world market. Also, they are able to provide the highest living standards among all the other clusters, apart from the outlier countries, as I said, because like Luxembourg or Switzerland, they are not part of one of these 2 clusters, but they also top performance. So very competitive in the world market, also very high standards of living, so high future index and high inside index. And they also have so very high outside and inside index. And then they also have high future index values. However, cluster number 2 is significantly better in this respect. And as I move on to my next slide, you will see that this difference in their future value is more or less as a result of their differences in green growth. So whilst this market-oriented model of development does not do well in green growth, so the factor value for green growth for them is pretty bad. Cluster number 2, which is this more European development model, but let's say it's a Northern European based on participation and a lot of interaction between the government and the market and the civil society. So this second cluster does a lot better. And then you can also see the individual countries here that have the highest green growth factor values. It's important to know that the United Kingdom goes into cluster number 1, so it's a market-oriented model, but still they are an outlier in that cluster, if you like. So as a conclusion, I will go on to talk about 2 things. One is that this is a unique way of approaching green growth, but actually the results that we get are very similar to those of the literature. So there is a fairly thorough literature review in my paper that I didn't talk about right now, but I checked at least 10 studies that focused on OECD countries, and they use different methodologies and different approaches, but the final goal over there was similar. So they tried to investigate which are the main development models and which are the best green growth models in the OECD. So my results are very similar to those. Obviously, there are some differences. And the second message is that at least for now, what we can see is that, well, obviously green growth is a lot about regulation, and those countries that have a strong tradition in regulation, they are doing much better than the market-oriented. And so this is a big debate, whether you should leave it to the market to do it. You just need to create the right incentives for the market to go into the right direction. But of course, creating the incentives, this is about regulation. And it's, at least at the moment, it seems quite clear that that those countries that already have a lot of knowledge about how to regulate the economy, they are able to perform better as well in this respect. Okay, so that was it. Thank you very much.